All right, so last couple chapters here. We move into chapter 19, and it's back to J.R. Isidore and his perspective. And the last thing we remember from J.R. is really this surreal, supernatural kind of episode that he goes through, in which he too has kind of direct contact with Mercer, which is, I think, substantial when you consider the status of J.R. Isidore being a special, and yet still having this kind of this connection with Mercer. So how do we interpret it? Is this even effective writing from a writing standpoint? Well, I think there's another reference to nails, right, which is essentially, I think, a motif at this point for the wound suffered by Christ for humanity, right, the selflessness that's involved there. It does make sense in that JR is a potential savior to the androids, his continuous desire to help them and feel that empathic connection with them. And just like it mentions with Isis, right, which the name translates to, the Egyptian goddess, going to show that empathy despite the fact that we have these jealous androids that don't treat him so well throughout most of the text. Roy is definitely having a hard time at this point, as he feels like the bounty hunter is definitely closing in on them, and it's you know, he never. They set up their booby traps, they do what they can, but it always feels like they are the prey, right? And I think that's why that motif as well is so powerful in this story, because it reminds us of the predicaments that some of these characters in, Roy, Irmgard, Pris, all being hunted here at the very end, and I think you can see the fear. We do ask ourselves the questions. I'll leave it up to you as the reader. Still at this point in the story, do you feel that androids, their fear even, is genuine, right? Or is this something that's simulated and really has no bearing upon our thinking? Moving forward, Isidore now holds a spider, but the thought that it could be different crosses his mind. Like, what if it's just another spider? This is directly taking us to the big topic of androids, right? Even though they are essentially simulated humans, it's kind of another human. Do we feel discontent? It takes me back to what Rick says in the early parts of the story before he gives the Voight-Kamp empathy test to Rachel. It's the idea that they don't know I exist that really irks him, that really frustrates him about androids. But he's guilty of that very same problem. He doesn't know of all the androids and their suffering, right? It's almost like he doesn't know they exist. So a lot of these things can be thrown back on Rick, right, in terms of criticism. Another parallel kind of event to this is Horace the cat. We go back to that early example where an electric cat will be a proper stand-in for a dead real one. And these androids, when we talk about the androids being into stand-in as humans, a big part of that, I think, is their earnest desire to be a part of the, you know, what I'll call the empathy exchange, right, with the practice of Mercerism, but they've kind of been denied this. The language reads, quote unquote, but anyhow, it was alive, right? This could be a resolution for John, ultimately his commitment to other life. He knows what it feels like to be excluded, right? So despite the fact that he's been treated this way, he's still willing to accept more people into the people that we, consider within our society. Okay, so the snipping of the spider's legs reflects the nails of Pris, or the nails inflicted on Christ. The acts are linked in terms of meaning. This brings us to the Garden of Eden of sorts, to return to the ruptured yet redeemed soul, a chance at renewal and inclusion. So here at the end, John essentially has the spider back intact miraculously. He says, what if it's another one I don't carry? Kind of just keeps going. And maybe that's the idea. And I've heard, people who really, think about the future and AI and androids and things on this level, there will be, I think a good film that deals with this particular take on it is AI. I think the Spielberg film. And it is this idea that they're going to outlast us, right? Once we build something that is so unstoppable in terms of intellect, physical condition, what they're made of, the only problem we have here is lifespan. That's kind of what Dick has given us as a major drawback, right, to being an android, plus the slave condition, right, as well. So he takes this spider and he essentially brings it to the only fertile spot with a little bit of grass that seems to exist not only outside this, ritzy San Francisco apartment building that's utterly abandoned, right? Completely no one there except for a few people like John and these androids at this point. But even in the world, right? The whole idea is that there could be very little possibility at rebirth, and not only on a level of Earth, right? And rejuvenation there and replenishing a population instead of having this, need to go to Mars or this desire to go to Mars to stay here and to have that rebirth. But it also speaks to people on a personal level, characters on a personal level, what they've done, the androids and the killing that they've done, and now they need some kind of redemption in order to move forward. You think about Rick, you think about Phil, who at this point in the story, chapters 18 and 19, will not be with us any longer, right? These were characters to learn from, and they kind of go their own ways. So here we are with the spider in the grass, right? A chance to start again. Garden of Eden, I think it's kind of taking us back to the very beginnings. The garden is said, quote unquote, the garden had perished during the war. That diction of perished doesn't seem to fit dead grass, so it seems to encapsulate so much more. So much more is what is represented by this little spot of grass. An accumulation of our sins, destruction, and the path had ruptured in 1,000 places. All this diction, it speaks to epic kind of proportions, humanity, right? Everything that's kind of occurred over the course of thousands and thousands of years. He finds the familiar path, and it felt good. I believe this speaks to moral and kind of ethical path. What Rick has, especially at this point in the story, remaining on the hunt for these androids, I think he's strayed from this highly. It's an interesting story where, perhaps the climax doesn't come until much late because Rick is definitely still dealing with his biggest fears and worries and moral dilemmas because he keeps pressing forward, right? Has a lot to do with buying the goat and having to move forward with this. And you think about the symbolism there, right? Deposit. Look at that, more diction. Deposits the spider. I only mention that word mainly because of the idea of money and currency and exchange. And we do have a deposit, a final deposit, it seems, of the spider here, right? And John watches the wavering progress, which is oxymoronic language here at the end, of the spider, the wavering progress. There will be progress, but there will be wavering, right? Which is to say it might be slow, it might be erratic, people might fail, continue to fail. I think this goes back to really the Voight-Kamp empathy test and the idea that you're given no time, right? We tell you're an android because you take less than, even by a second or so, whatever it ends up being, what a human would take, which means we're not giving you the chance to get quicker with this, right? To meet that standard that we have. And I think this is what it is, right? It's that wavering progress. We all are headed in the right direction, but some of us may fall more than others and fall a little bit harder than others as well. We will fall, we will sin, we will be sixes, but we can find salvation, right? John straightens up. I think that's very important to rise one last time, because this is it for John. This is it for John. So to straighten up, have a straight back here, and you think about this idea of ascent. I think that's an important. That's important that we see. After all, that downward descent, right? Bless. So in a way, we kind of, final blessings fall with JR in this book, I think. Moving forward, Rick arrives, right? A key moment when he's depositing the spider, and JR says he put it down so that it could get away. right? Very similar to the androids trying to find freedom, or the slave we talk about historically, that huge context, trying to get away, right? He is the helper here, right? I think that speaks very positively, to put it quite generally, of course, but I think that speaks to his role in this, right? He was trying to give freedom this whole time. I think the Nexus 6 Andy human being analogy is very clear here as well, right? We're not talking about androids. In one way we are, but we're especially not talking about androids like this because people, it's just not there yet. And it's not going to be there yet for probably 100, 200, who knows how many years, right? I don't think all this stuff is happening as exponentially as we may think it is. So that's fiction. But what are we always talking about whenever we get animals or we get robots or we get this in a story? We're talking about ourselves, right? And I think that's usually the intention of an author. JR shares the news of how Mercerism was debunked with Rick. Rick hadn't heard this yet, right before the hunting of the last 3 Andys. So Mercerism, he's informed, has been frauded right before he starts this final hunt. There are 1,000 apartments. It just seems epic, right? The kind of the amount that we get here. 1,000 apartments he's going to have to search through. I want to mention this too because this is something I looked up at this time. I don't know if I ever looked up Van Ness. It's the Van Ness Pet Hospital, right? It's the fake hospital that helps electric animals, right? On the sly, right? They kind of do the cover up. What does Van Ness translate to? Spit of land, which means a small amount of land. So giving someone a place to exist. I think because they cater to electric animals, we take that metaphor right up to the next level. It's the idea of helping electric people, androids. John was ready for this. J.R. Isidore was born for this in some respects, right? But he was ready for it, even through the place that he worked. This idea of giving them something too. That's why some of these other names we get in this book, even smaller characters that show up once in a while, are given names that represent an excess of land. Here, we're just trying to give someone a little, right? Just for survival. I like the idea here, I love the movement up and down in this book. I like the idea that Rick is not able to ascend because JR does not assist, right? He goes up the path, this path bleeding with a yellow light, feels like nails in crucifixion. He has thought of going back and getting the spider to capture something that is a live, wild animal, but he doesn't, all right? He starts to go up the stairwell and find these androids. The hunt. He uses his revolving D-Tech snout. And I love how Philip K. Dick brings animals into this story in so many ways, in ways that I'm pointing out here, right, that nobody necessarily points out. A revolving D-Tech snout, he's just trying to give it a snout like a dog or an animal, a predator, right, to exemplify the animal prowess that is on display here. We are animals. We are beasts, right? That's the idea. Without, of course, this idea of religion, which is civilization and all this stuff, right? It's historically, it kind of goes hand in hand. And religion really likes to preach that message as well, right? Without religion, there is no civilization. We are savages. We are beasts. I think you're seeing that here as he's on the hunt for these 3 androids. Rick can feel his hard laser tube but cannot lift it. I think hard kind of speaks for itself. We've had enough reference to male genitalia throughout this entire story to maybe speak to the aggressive nature of men, right? And how that can be exemplified through the genitalia here, especially how it speaks to sexual experience as well, right? There's no doubt. No bearing of this aggression, force of masculinity. Here in the stairwell, we are symbolically in the transitional phase of human character and potential. Ascent and descent so close. There's a stairwell on every floor, right? It's just up and down here. It's wonderful how Philip K. Dick takes that and brings it into this one of these last scenes so well. Even the last scene that comes after this, you'll see this idea of up and down. On the steps, Mercer reports to Rick. So Mercer's like calling it out, like a good friend here, right? Like a tactical helper. He's calling out where the androids are. So he's helping here. And he's telling him he's on the steps, which is interesting because that's that transitional place. You can go up and down. I think it speaks to moral and ethical character, right? And what you do with your life. Rick, more language, thrusts out his laser tube, spins and sinks, right? Always falling when he seems to shoot. She seems to look like Rachel in this moment. She pleads to embrace, and he emboldens himself to kill her. Her gun, that she does not use, bounces and descends, right? I like how the weapon actually has its own movement of going down. It could speak to the idea of violence, that whole idea, we were just talking about male aggression as represented by the guns throughout this text, but it does go down. The hard one of the three speaks to an uncapped, merciless male aggression, the attitude needed to subdue a woman. Rick convinces himself that Mercer protected him because the android would have killed him. Why is this the most difficult Nexus 6 for Rick? Pris, who doubles up in appearance as Rachel, why would you think this is the most difficult, right? And, sometimes I just ask the questions. I could always give my answers, but the answers would be too long, because I think all of us have so much to say, right, when we think of why was this the most difficult. There's probably at least a few major ideas we could talk about there. One being his experiences with Rachel. One being this general idea about women and younger women, right? They both look like 18-year-old women. Moving forward, for the baddies, winter had come. All right, that's what, quote unquote, winter had come, a freezing over. That's what he's thinking here. Feels like he is playing God. In the apartment, Irmgard is the smaller shape. Irmgard asks about Pris as she sees her as an individual, but Rick claims they are all stamped out like clones. So I think we're still getting this kind of counter evidence, this counter claim that androids do care about each other. They do have empathy, whether it be for maybe real humans or other androids. I think Irmgard, Pris, Roy, they are presented like a family, and you can do your own read on it. I tend to feel like there's enough detail throughout the text that does bring them together like a real family. They care about each other. This could be one of those moments. She wants to know what happened. Or you could see this from the other side, other point of view, which is it's just self-preservationism. She just wants to know, did you kill this one, so then I know to run away? I mean, you could look at it that way too. I'll leave it up to you. But Rick definitely, whatever your take on that, Rick finds the need to remind himself, they're all the same. All these androids are just stamped out, right? They're all the same. Is that the same way it works historically? When we talk about slaves, when we talk about slaves in our country, when we talk about Jews during the Holocaust and all the other kind of similar contexts throughout time, is it similar? The rebuttal, Roy cries out in agony after Rick shoots Irmgard. And there's another one of those moments. Why is he crying out in agony? Is it because he just lost his partner, his friend, his wife? Or is it because he knows he's next? And there's already this kind of, impulsive reaction that he's having. I tend to see it as he cared for her, right? But again, it's up to you. It is interesting to see Roy's demise occur in a kitchen when we consider themes of gender roles and dominance. I think that was done purposefully. Roy, I don't think, comes across as chauvinistic, as overtly masculine or aggressive or assertive, and here he dies in the kitchen. And the kitchen is one of the clearest examples you could, kind of give of a domesticated woman's experience, right? Which this book maybe is pushing up against, giving us an alternative point of view here. He dies in the kitchen, right? Rick retires 6 sixes. There you go. Time to get back home to Iran and the goat. That's all he can think about, getting home to the goat. Rick says, don't take it so hard, right, to JR. Rick hunts for phone, right? He hunts for the phone. You see the diction, the verb here. Total predator state here in this chapter 19. Total predator state. That's what I say. We're almost done. There is literally a couple chapters here, right? One more chapter, chapter 20. So even in chapter 19, he is definitely fulfilling the role of the vicious predator through and through here, right? Yeah, so just to say it, he is the living embodiment of the selfish predator, a myth that may not apply to Andy's any longer, right? All the things that the feelings and the perspectives and the negative portrayals that you hoist upon another people, in the end, really just reflect exactly who you are and what you're doing, right? The irony is very thick. Here it is, people, chapter 20, which it seems to have a couple scenes here, right? Bryant says, good, go get some rest. So there's that word rest. After all this 6, and Rick is still kind of embodying the whole idea of the savage in some ways, I think. He says, go get some rest. However, Rick speaks like a savage without religious code. He says Roy was stupid for not being able to decipher between Rick and JR. Two vastly different sides to humanity, the goats and the sheep, right? He should have known it wasn't JR and it was me, right? But it speaks to the exact two different sides of humanity. We just got done with JR and he's done with the text, and we really solidified him as somebody helping, at the least, helping the spiders to escape, and here comes Rick to get them, right? And so there it is, your two sides of humanity. JR flounders like a fish, so Christianity, we're given some Christian symbolism here, before he leaves Rick all by himself, which is the worst place you could be, a sinner all by yourself, right, in need of some kind of resolution. Especially when we talk about the sin of murder, when you consider the other who you killed a sentient being. And I think that's happened to Rick. He's changed his mind, but yet he's stuck in the game, right? And so he continues. And I think it gets worse, right? All right. Expressions cross his face. Christianity, Rick feels a bit ashamed. Let's keep it going here. Next scene. Rachel pushes, we find out, Rick's goat off the roof. Tons of symbolism. Tons of symbolism. So see what happens here. We have electric female sheep, that's Rachel, right, is pushing a female goat, a real female goat, off a roof. There's so much coming together here. You got the parable of the sheep and the goat. Notice the sheep is taking violent action, violent retribution, which was foreshadowed chapters ago, where it talked about the Israelites and kind of the revenge and the vengeance that would assuredly come from the Israelites to their antagonists. So this was, in a way, foreshadowed. And then you think about the idea of descent, right? The goat would descend, just like the gun descended down the stairwell. Here we have the goat descending as well, because it takes someone to hold that gun, right? And to be that callous to human or just suffering in general. So there it is, right? She pushes the goat off the roof. I bet you did not see that coming. I don't think anybody actually does. We have a descent, just like the laser pistol, of an animal that is tied to the parable. In fact, it is Rachel, the female sheep, that pushes the goat, right? A sign of anger and protest. She wages a counter war. Why would she do this, right? She hits him where it hurts too, with that goat. He's got a contract on it. He's in debt. He's got to work. So she hit him where it hurts. And the symbolism there. Stop being the self-preservationist, the one that does not see the suffering of others. Stop being that person. I think it's a protest, and I'm going to hit you where it hurts here. And the goat, could you imagine that poor goat? Oof. Good thing he didn't describe the bottom of the building, right? Wherever that might have happened. You could do that. That could be some good art that you base off the story, right? That would be pretty sick. All right, let's keep on going here. All right. Rick says everything is true, everything anybody has ever thought. He gives credit to anybody, even androids there, right? Thinking in general. I think, therefore I am, right? Some of that Descartes stuff. I think you can apply that here. A validation of all perspective, including artificial electric as truth. Rick flies to a remote, desolate area, a feeling of breaking free here at the end, free from his job as a bounty hunter, and what has been mentioned before, the form destroyer. And here it is, chapter 21, moving right along. Where he arrives, which is like Northern California, or maybe even up by Seattle, kind of up there. He's up there. Pebbles the size of houses. Notice that through some of the imagery here, we're tied back to domesticated environments, houses, right? Reminding us of home life, man and wife. Also, shipping room, merchandise, mercantilism, right, with Mercer. The world came close as he descends in his hovercraft, coming down to earth, observing his own humanity. I think that's it, right? Why is it so hard? Because of the earthly temptation, because of the rat race, because of the routines we fall victim to that are part of this earth, of course, right? So he's coming down to witness all that again. He calls Mount Zion Hospital. If you start to look up some stuff with Zion, it's the holiest place on earth. It's the city where David defeated Goliath, right, of the Philistines. So that's all kind of giving us some biblical stuff here at the end. And here we are trying to find Dave Holden and Dr. Costa. Costa translates to rib, will not let the call through due to his condition. Costa, why would we get a name that translates to rib here at the end of the story? I think it's tying us back to what we are, which is just creatures that came out of the muck, right? That's what it's setting us up for. So the ribs. Also the rib of God. I think that might be it too. God made by the rib. But Philip K. Dick is also going to blend in this idea of evolution here, which he already has a little bit as well. But the rib, right? Dr. Costa. Because man was made from the rib. Or women was made from the rib. See how I'm figuring things out even on the fly here, which is kind of nice. That could be it too. That could be the reference there. Rick retires 6 Nexus 6s in 24-hour period. Man is created in 1 day, day 6, right? And what do we get? You get sheep and you get goats. Some of us will be the sheep, some of us will be the goats. And God obviously favors one. Sheep are on the right-hand side, goats are on the left. Rick is noxious. Is not content with his role as bounty hunter any longer. He's even having a physical aversion to it, like a physical reaction, which is quite normal. And you see that in Shakespeare, you see it in all kinds of stuff where the grief is so intense, the person is puking, right? It's like a physical reaction to it. Angry at himself, he spat with wrath and contempt, all for himself. It's all coming at the end here. I think this is the true final judgment kind of critique, and it's affecting him. Rick senses that with killing all of the androids and what Rachel did to his goat, he has been defeated. Rick all of a sudden is the goat at the face of a cliff, just like his goat was with Rachel, right? It's so cool how Philip K. Dick matches everything up. Bravo. Rick all of a sudden is yes, I said this. Here he thinks about courage and pride. These are troublesome characteristics when we think about this novel. He is first struck in inguinal area, which is the groin, right? That's where he first gets hit by a rock. Notice we're going right after the groin area because of all the references to male genitalia. What needs correcting? What needs redemption? Male aggression, right? Maybe that's one of the final statements here, and that's why he's getting hit there. He's got to feel the pain there in order to change. Groin, as this is an area of concern and redemption for him, leads to knowledge of absolute suffering and isolation. No compassion with this rage of masculinity, maybe, right? That's just an idea I'll throw out there. He goaded on like a sheep. This may be a path of opportunity for Rick here at the end, redemption. My God, he realized, it's my shadow. My God is my shadow. Lowercase g is a false god, right? If you are expressing real belief, you capitalize it. So here we have a lowercase, all right? The switchboard operator, notice the people talking to him in some of these final moments, is Miss Wilde, because that's our initial state. That's before civilization, that's before religion, that's before empathy, right? In kind of that whole exchange. We were once wild. So notice the calls coming in here at the end. Uncontained, not to be penned. It informs Rick to call his wife. She chides Rick for feeling exhausted and dismayed by his work. You should keep it up, right? Notice Miss Wilde is telling her to get a move on, keep it going. Makes sense because it is the wild evolution of humanity without Christ's path that would criticize us for being soft from these experiences. They want to bolster his resolve to kill. Not sure how I feel about Rick's mindset. Sounds like he is doing what Buster Friendly commented about Hitler. He's using God as a way to bind people against the misery, pain, suffering of others, right? That idea that a would-be Hitler could use something like mercerism, in a sense, religion, to bind people against other people, right? And I guess you could say it's like that. Gersham's law of money, right? The corruption of money. Maybe the same thing is happening with empathy as well. He says, thanks, Anne. Anne translates to favor of God, also eagle. Rick is emboldened against Rachel, has even more hatred and resentment towards her. She ends the novel safely with a family, the Rosens, and I think that word is key, and it mentions it, straight diction from the story. She ends with a family, which is a big word when you talk about the fact that she's an android, right? And it takes empathy to belong to a family. What an ending. I mean, we talk about Rish just kind of Phil Resch going his way, and we see here that Rachel just kind of outlives everybody. Does she have that fatal time period built in that she can only live 4 years? I'm not sure. She has a very special place within the Rosen Association, so it's hard to tell. But that's how the story ends for her as well. And he ends with an elated feeling of immortality, feeling like a god here at the end. Chapter 22, last one. We're going back home here, all right, back to Iran. And then he finds, before that. And then he finds a toad, all right, before he leaves, of course. Here's the toad. We know that this is the most important animal for Mercer, all right, so just to remind you of that. It represents our humility, I think, my analysis on this, that we are a species that rose, no pun intended, from the muck and only have a limited time here on Earth, right? We are a species that evolved and our time is quite limited. Toad is described as a bulge in the ground among the stones. I think more kind of male genitalia there. He pulls out a Sidney's catalog. All right. Sidney's translates, I haven't done this one yet, to wide meadow. There you go. We talked about Van Ness being a small spot, a spit of land, like spit from your mouth, a small piece of land. And here we have Sidney's, which is whatever all the humans are doing with their real animals. And notice that it translates to wide meadow, this major sense of freedom that maybe as a human you always have, and maybe you even take it for granted. I said it before, it's Mercer's most precious animal. We shouldn't underestimate the importance of this discovery. For Rick, he feels it's his claim to riches and fame. Notice he starts thinking monetarily, which is interesting. Jesus is exclaimed and referenced here. Hard to make sense of his frantic thinking for me. Afraid he's becoming like J.R. Isidore, which actually I think for us as readers we understand may be a good thing, especially because he has such a positive send-off. J.R. Isidore helping these androids escape, symbolically the spider, bringing it back to some rebirth, right? And trying to maybe do that for the androids as well. In any case, it's too good to be true. Can Rick bring it back to life? More interesting if you apply the fact that it's electric, right? Which is what it ends up being. Then it represents the strength and hope of androids to live and survive. He starts thinking it will need water for its eggs, so procreation is not possible when we know by the end of this chapter that it's actually electric. But all he's thinking is maybe it'll need things for its eggs, it needs to procreate, so he has that in his mind. Maybe that's why we still have these lingering, though they're there, frequent enough, references to male genitalia in terms of this idea of procreation, right? With the box, he ties it again and again, a subduing of android life. 30 or 40 minutes passes. 30 is a very interesting number when you think biblically. It represents like the time in a person's life where they are ready to join the priesthood, which is when Christ is said to have joined the priesthood. So 30, right? It's time to now take action based on all this living and reflection. 700 miles away, 7 is rest, perhaps. We're back to Iran, and we're back to the Penfield mood organ. Penfield, don't forget, translates to pen in, contain, right? Through its use, you think about it, brings everybody kind of in. He has the idea of dialing 888. I don't know what to make of this, of course. I just know that in terms of Chinese numerology, that's the most positive number you can get. That's why they had their Olympics on, I think it was, 8808, I think it was, like whenever they did the Olympics, they wanted to make sure they did it on the days that landed on 8s. So positive, at least in the Chinese context. Rick's eyes likened to Rachel. So there's always those big eyes. We saw them on Pris, we see them on Rachel, I think you see them on Luba, and now you're even seeing him on Rick. And now he's going to be shining through the dust, right? So this hopeful pair of eyes shining through the dust. He's described as a child returning from play, ready to tell about all the miracles of the day. Miracles feels very Christ-like, rebirth. And going back to this idea of being a child, it's important because he is not a man, with an emphasis on anatomy, right? Emphasis on anatomy for a man is one thing, but for a boy it makes no sense. We're just not there yet, right? So he's gone back to maybe a non-aggressive state. Okay, moving forward. Generally speaking, the toad is a reflection of his experience. He says toads don't have teeth. How do we read this? They're not harmful, they're not predatory. What Rick can possibly become, right? A sheep, right? Not these sharp teeth. The toad, they don't jump well, we know that, so it can't really ascend, and they don't need water. Takes me back to the idea of Rick talking about getting an ostrich earlier in the story, just this idea of surviving off very little, right? They don't need much water. To survive in this world, you have to live off very little, we know. The context of this sci-fi novel. There's another nail, this time poking the abdomen, eggs and fertility, right? Rick is crestfallen, but prefers to know that it is indeed electric. The electric things have their lives too, so it's kind of a letdown, but at the same time, he kind of surrenders to this idea that, as he says, the electric things have their lives too, paltry as those lives are. Paltry means like tiny and meaningless, as far as I know. So just saying that, even your smallest kind of, the smallest forms of life out there, whatever they might be, are lives too, and he's starting to recognize that. But look where the recognition comes, my goodness. At the end, when he's done so much damage, right? He says God, and he does put God here, and we get capital letters on this one, but it is because it's in the beginning of the sentence. But he says, what a marathon assignment. And I think we get the word marathon because it ties you back to Greek language, and tying us back to Greek and Roman proportions, Greek and Roman conquest, Western civilization. Okay, so as he comes back, this experience seems to bring Rick and Aran together as he brings home this toad that he thinks is real, at least at this point, in a gentle way. She seems to comfort him. He wants to dial 670, long-deserved peace. For Rick, what is he looking for peace from? As the dust from his clothes falls onto, and finally, last time in the book, and this is really where I noticed it, and then I started seeing it earlier in the text, which is the color white. We don't get this color a lot in the story. Used very sparingly. And I think it's purity and innocence. He's already been described like a boy again, right? And now we get back to this purity and innocence. The diction here, the phrase is legions of battles. Rick sheds a representation of timeless warfare of bloodlust and conquest. He's not just the bounty hunter in this science fiction book. He is the killer that has existed throughout time, right? And that's why it's so interesting to talk about it historically, right, in the various contexts that it occurs, right? And that's why we get tied back to marathon in Greek and Roman, because it was bloodlust, it was conquest, right? It was never ending, right, until of course it ends. But it was always of that kind of that prowess, or the war of good and evil that is waged for his heart and mind. Toward the end, we find reference is to crawling and flying bugs. This may speak to the two types of people, sinners and those that find salvation. Aran only wants flies here at the end. Correlates with not being upsold on a purchase. I think that's important. She doesn't need anything, she just wants flies, right? And she doesn't get upsold. It's kind of a denial of that consumer tendency that seems to drive Rick, right? When he's signing away on goats, he's getting kind of, turned on by the whole process, spending that money and kind of all that, right? Here, at the end, and I think this is where it turns positive for me, right? She says, no, we're fine, right? A bit positive, I guess you could say. Moving forward, and the horned toad, Rick, that can survive off very little, right? It suggests to make a periodic tongue adjustment and that it's vital for a toad. Aran agrees, wants it to work perfectly because Rick is devoted to it. That's a strong word to use, especially in the sense of religious meaning. Devoted here at the end, he's devoted to this electric toad. We ask ourselves, what does this act symbolize? Is this his final acceptance? Take note of a devoted Aran who wants to have Rick be happy and comfortable with the electric toad and cater to it. Another thing I'll say, because I've noticed it, is a renewal, a perpetually renewing puddle. They're going to have to buy a perpetually renewing puddle for the toad. And the idea of perpetually renewing does tie back to something earlier in the text. My mind is boggled by this stuff, but I think it speaks to the idea on a symbolic level, a thematic level, of somebody who can always find redemption, somebody who can perpetually find redemption and rebirth in their lives, right? And I think it speaks to that personal level, which is obviously tied to religion and spirituality for a lot of people, right? But that can be something that continuously happens, not only for a person throughout their entire life, but also for different people throughout ages, that we can forgive, that we can understand, that we can find the empathy and bring more people in, right? Last critical question, is this what we want Rick to be devoted to? This electric toad at the end. Could this be his devotion and change and redemption? Are we ending this novel on going in a positive direction? I think he says no to no more bounty hunting jobs, so I think that's also probably some positive evidence as well. Well, that's going to do it. I'm glad to get all these lectures in, and I hope you enjoyed the novel. I hope this, perhaps makes you want to read other novels, which there are many, 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 and short stories. The Philip K. Dick Reader is an excellent collection of all of Philip K. Dick's short stories that lead to some of the most popular movies we've heard, like Total Recall and some others, right, that made it to the big screen. Unfortunately, way after Philip K. Dick was dead. People were just kind of taking his work posthumously. But you should read more of his work. He's a fantastic author. I'm very happy to get these lectures together, and thank you. I hope you have a good day.